Well, chocolate.
How about?
Good evening. I'd like to call this regular meeting of Scio Township to order. We'll first have the roll call, and then I'll ask if you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Hathaway,
Present.
Palmer, Flintoff, present, Brazeau,
Present.
Carey,
Present.
Noel, present, Riser, absent,
Present.
and present.
Just made it. Well, you're in time for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That brings us to adoption of the agenda. There are a few changes and additions. One is to I1. This is to change this from a discussion only to a possible action item. And then I would like to propose that we remove the following items from new business: J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, and the intent is to bring these back after doing a little bit more work on them. Are there other changes? I think I know there are some additions.
Yes, I would like to propose adding two items. One is I would propose for consent the revised authorization to enter into countywide early voting agreement, same as we approved last time, with some changes that don't affect Scio Township. And second, to add to new business, approval of request for proposal for the annual audit.
So that would be item G11.
Yep, so early voting would be G11 and the audit would be J6. I mean J7.
J7, okay.
I would move the agenda as
Modified.
modified. Thank you.
Moved by Riser,
I'll support.
support by Noel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The agenda as modified is approved. That brings us to communications to the Board of Trustees. Is there anything to be said about these? They're in the packet. If not, then let's move on to public comment. This is a time for members of the public to speak for up to 3 minutes on any matter under the purview of the Board of Trustees. We hear first from those who are present here in the hall, and then once everyone here is spoken who wants to speak, we turn to those who are participating remotely. And our timekeeper is Trustee Brazeau. Whom in the hall would like to speak first? Kai, come on up, have a seat at the table.
Good evening, Alan Bravano, representing low density Parkwood. I'm just going to read from a missive I sent you last Thursday. It's in your packet. Dear Scio Trustees, low density Parkwood remains terrified of future stormwater as it relates to the proposed Arborist Grove project. We remain equally terrified about the known sanitary sewer system details. However, the authoritative linchpin to the above and all else is the following clause. Parkwood Bylaws, Article 4. Provided, however, that neither the board nor the association shall by act or omission abandon, partition, subdivide, encumber, sell, or transfer the common elements or any of them unless at least a 67% of the mortgagees and 67% of the members in number and value have consented thereto. The granting of easements for public utilities or for other public purposes consistent with the intended use of the common elements by the condominium shall not be deemed a transfer for these purposes. Our message is multifaceted but simple. First and foremost, the above clause is not ambiguous. It serves to democratically protect every resident. In this case, a bold commercial request that would push every drop of AG discharged stormwater across Parkwood property. Item 2, without a 67% approving co-owner vote, the current Parkwood board does not possess requisite authority. 3, as a matter of historical precedence, prior Parkwood boards have held our bylaws sacrosanct. We have not altered nor knowingly deviated from them. In practical terms, our bylaws have served us well. 4, bylaws compliance is important, conveying empowerment to the most responsible manner. And lastly, we appeal to every trustee in good conscience and for the good of the entire Scio community that this project should not be allowed to go forward without a formal vote by Parkwood co-owners. All 52 of them. Respectfully, Alan Brabant. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alan.
Good evening, board. I'd like to thank you all for serving the residents of Scio Township. It's not an easy job. You have to hear it from both sides and in the middle, so I know it's not easy. But I am here. I'm Kevin Jackson, resident of Parkwood Condominiums. I'm in support of Alan and the low density group. Again, it's going to boil down to the legal aspects, which Alan just stated is applying to our residents. So I'd just like to appeal to the board by stating when projects are first proposed to you, most of the time the community comes out and says, oh no, we can't do it. Too much noise, too much traffic, too much whatever. And then you go through the documents and you find out that the developer is meeting all the legal requirements. And so you must approve whatever the developer is doing. Given that, if this developer with this proposal, mind you, we're not against development of that property. We hope that you keep it in the spirit of Scio Township with that corridor of calm between Liberty and Park. Currently, it is a corridor of calm, but it's getting more busy and faster traffic every day that I pull out of the street. If the current proposal is approved, there's gonna be at least 36 more vehicles in that corridor calm, which then that corridor calm is gone. I watch people try to cross the street. It's very hard for them. You really gotta look both ways. You gotta cross at an angle. You gotta make sure that you told your people ahead of time, look out for me because I might not make it. I mean, it's getting very busy on that street. So if a more reasonable development was proposed and they meet every legal requirement, please pass it. If this proposal of 36 units does not meet all the legal requirements, please oppose it. Thank you.
Hi, Kathleen Brandt, a Scio resident. I want to talk about the appointment process for boards and commissions. I know that some of these were just taken off the agenda. I was going to state, and I will state that this process is
Not your
flawed.
fault, sorry, not your fault, don't worry, my bad.
Is 190 minutes?
Go ahead, you have 99 minutes and 54 seconds.
Then I can take my time. So this process is flawed. There is no, that I have seen, no public calling for volunteers on boards or commissions. It is simply an act of asking the current people if they would like to continue. There's no fresh blood, there's no fresh ideas. There's no even asking the public if they would like to participate. So I strongly object to this process. I think it could be done a lot better. Why don't we ask people? There's lots of ways we can ask them. Also, the habit of just taking existing members, I think is flawed. We all know there's one person on the planning commission that missed about a half of the meetings and does not read the materials. This person asked consistently for information about what's before that commission. That person should not be reappointed by any fashion. I don't want that person to making decisions on planning approvals. They're not prepared. I don't see they have ever been prepared. Okay, another topic, the audit. I did watch the audit meeting that was held at 2 o'clock on whatever day that was. And I'm just wondering, is the board going to further discuss any of the findings? I understand that from last year, we had 5 material findings, and this year we have 7. That's not a good trend. And it seems there are no repercussions for repeated findings. And no discussion of fixes to a process. How can you have 7 findings and not talk about how to fix those? An example is late tax distributions to other tax entities. This happens almost every year. There's no fix for it. There's no repercussion. There was a question to the treasurer and no answers, nothing, silence. That is not acceptable. Another one, funds out of balance, which is a direct contrary to the Budgeting and Accounting Act. No discussion about how that happens. How do we fix that? This is not good. It's not improving the process. I will also note that the last investment report put on the Scio webpage is March 2023. We're now 2 investment reports behind. That was a finding last year. I don't see these 2. It should be a finding next year, and I hear no conversations about how does that get corrected. In fact, there was a person from the public that pointed out that our interest rates were appallingly low, which triggered some action to get a better interest rate. So that's all I have. I wish you would look at some of the legalities of Arborist Farms. There were 2 critical issues mentioned. One is the vote of the condominium board, 67%. And there was also some feedback from Bob Hyde on the Planning Commission about a zoning regulation regarding that exact property when an adjoining property, same owner, was sold. And then this Arborist Groves property no longer qualifies for the density. I've never seen an answer to that. Can we get an answer to that? It seems like a legal question. Thanks.
Is there anyone else? Brian?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll touch on a couple of these items since they were just removed anyways, just for clarity. First off, G2, having the final bill as a lump sum with no other detailed progress billing attachments for the audit is just not very transparent. It's hard to understand what $49,000 of work actually, it was definitely work that occurred, but who did what work when? It just sort of is one line item, at least on the attachment in the agenda. I would ask the same on G3, especially when I dove into G3. I believe it's been removed now, but the amount of hours that were expended in September.
So G2 and G3 are still on the consent agenda.
The items that were removed were under new business.
Oh, new business, sorry. Yep, my mistake then. G3 specifically has a lot of hours being billed in September for Manor to help us. as in 30, 25, 30, and 40 hours per staff member, which was very high to me when I was looking at that, especially without another detailed progress billing report being provided or a WIP report. G4, thank you for authorizing that fix for the utilities department to get the additional full-time equivalent. G7, thank you for applying for maintenance. We really need to continue our capital improvement plan. Welcome Assessor Garrett. Not surprised that we're looking at possibly up to a 4% increase from the state when they come up with our rate next month for our inflation rate. It's terrible, but it's probably what it's gonna be. I'd like to ask where the rest of the written reports are, specifically from Carlisle, Wortman, and OHM. I know that Doug left or is leaving or however that actually transpired. But OHM seemed to have provided one report a meeting or two ago, and it'd be great if they could keep providing those reports on a routine basis to us. Just looking at the website, we hadn't had a Carlisle Wortman report since August. I am encouraged to see J6 as a opportunity for strategic planning. When that does come up and if that does move forward, I think having the public as part of that process at some point as well would be very beneficial to see what public input the community would like to make strategic plans for the entire community. All right, thanks, everybody.
Fred?
Yeah, I got it working. It's gonna start at 7. Yeah, what can I tell you? I got it. It will, but hold on, it'll go. I got it now. See, now it works.
The reset.
Okay.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Evening, David.
Jamie Wingler, 7925 South Church Road. I got some stuff I was gonna read for you, but it's really just about the same stuff I've been talking about for the last, few years. So it's really not, I'm thinking about it right now, it's not even worth even talking about. We gotta do something. We need to, talk with the, Fruigs. We gotta do some kind of mediation. Cause I mean, right now, I don't know, there's nothing more for me to do but to go demonstrate. When I go over and demonstrate, I got people flipping me off, brides and, and I don't wanna hurt them people. That's not what I'm about. I got a mother a couple weeks ago sticking her finger up her ass at me, and I'm sure she would have shook everybody's hands. Then she sticks her hand up in her butt in her blouse, and it's insane. And that's what some of the people, they ain't the best of people. Some of the people are going over there. And then this last week, I went over there and her people are flipping me off, and I'm not saying nothing to nobody. I'm just like waving. I'm okay, I understand, and if you want to come over and talk, but it's not about you, so anyway, when they had the wedding, I'm not going to mess up her ceremony, so I left, and so I come back at night, and I was in the house. My girlfriend said, "Hey, I can hear the music." I went on the porch. I could hear the music. This is not 65 decibels. And so I walked down the street. So I walked in the dark. So I snuck up on them. It was 120.9 decibels. And so I'm playing this game that I got to play to do this. So I got a phone in my hand, and my flash ain't working. So I'm not the best spy. So I got my flash ain't working. So I'm trying to do this 120.9. Next thing I know, a golf cart comes flying in the side of me, and I got a security guard tell me he's gonna beat the fuck out of me, and tell me get the fuck out of here, and everybody, and I got them all over me, and so so it takes me a little while. Then I try to be nice back, but I'm not. I'm not nice either. I'm like, hey, I'm not gonna leave, and I'm on the road, and F you, So we was circling each other, about ready to get in a fist fight over nothing. And I told him I'm not gonna leave. I just want to get these measurements. And so he pulled out, he said, it can't be that much. He pulled out his phone. It was like 80, 84, then it went up to like 90. And I'm like, you guys can't do it. You guys can't do it. And I know you can't. And so then, he's wanting to fight me. He said, I want to kick your ass. He goes, he's trying to get at the fight. He goes, I want you to do it. I want you to do it. I got 20 something. Say, this is ridiculous, man. And so then after the whole thing came done, Kelly goes, oh, my head's like mush. I don't remember anything. I remember all the lies. I got them all here. I only got 3 minutes to talk to you guys. So anyway, on the way home, them guys was chasing me down. Ed, I stayed in the dark, and them guys were looking for me. They had flashlights out. They're not just walking around. I don't know what Ed was thinking, but it was like I was coming out of a prison, and it was coming after me. Things are heating up, and someone's going to get hurt.
Thanks, Jamie.
I got ours by 3 minutes. That's what I'm saying. There's something's gonna happen. Something's gonna happen. That's all I'm trying to tell you. We need to do something.
Who's next for public
Not
comment?
give them 10 more mulligans. You keep on saying, you keep on saying, we're gonna give them another mulligan, wait and get some more information. Things are gonna happen. I'm telling you, this is bad. That's all I'm trying to say.
Who's next for public comment?
Thank you, Jamie.
David Lutton, 2530 North Zeeb Road. I want to use my time tonight to update you a bit on the Sloan Kingsley annexation application and to make a request. A reminder, the annexation application is part of a three-part development proposal that includes the Many Hands campus, the nonprofit campus for developmentally disabled adults, and 105 acres proposed to the Scio Land Preservation Commission. I have submitted a new application to the Scio LPC, clearing up any confusion that may have arisen there. And I will be attending Thursday's LPC meeting this week. I have requested of the Scio subcommittee on annexation, a pause in future meetings for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's to everyone's benefit if we wait and get the extra utility capacity study, which is to be completed by the end of October. And I also have some other obligations that would keep me from being able to do much between now and the end of October. So last evening I spoke at the Dexter Council meeting, and I requested a November meeting with the Dexter subcommittee. This is in response to questions that were raised by council at a September working session that they had. It's also driven by the fact that I have not participated in any of the annexation subcommittee meetings. There have been 3 joint meetings, July, August, September, but I have been excluded from those. So I have requested, and I believe a meeting will be scheduled with the Dexter group. What I would like to do is schedule a meeting with the Scio subcommittee and present some new information to your group as well. The information for the 2 groups is somewhat different, but it would give you all, and I've heard this from both sides as this process has gone on and as I read your notes, that there isn't enough information. There isn't enough specific information. So part of it is to provide more information. The other part, and I mentioned this last night in Dexter, would be to consider the notion of negotiating a contingent 425 agreement, one with conditions that will have to be met before any annexation would occur.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
I will send some dates, suggested dates for a November meeting with your group. Thank you.
Is there anyone else present who would like to speak during public comment? If not, then let's proceed with those who are participating remotely.
Thank you, Will. Kathy J, in honor of not pushing your last name, you're first, followed by Rob Patterson.
Okay. Hi, it's Kathy Jeskevich. Thank you for not trying. Scio resident and member of the Environmental Sustainability Task Force. I'd like to urge your careful consideration of and support for the proposed Environmental Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, otherwise known as the SCAP. You've seen the plan and been given further information about how the plan came to be from the Planning Commission. The big picture is that the world is facing a climate crisis that demands our attention. You recognized this when you declared a climate emergency over a year ago, and directed the Planning Commission to develop a plan to address it. You supported the idea of working together with others to align efforts among neighboring communities and different levels of government. This is our opportunity to take a leadership role in making sure that this happens. We on the task force are really looking forward to helping implement this plan with great enthusiasm. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Rob Pattinson, please go ahead, followed by Bill Doty.
Thank you, Pattinson, Township resident. I find it ironic that the people most responsible for the mess our fire department is in are the ones fighting hardest to prevent long and needed improvements. Jack Knowles, with the help of Irwin Martin, gutted the recommended 1.95 mil fire SAD of 2019. In 2018, Scio paid $25,000 for an independent professional firm to evaluate the current and future needs of the township. Jack Knowles decided he was much smarter than this firm and gutted the fire SAD down to 1.35 mils. That was, that was not enough to keep the fire department at status quo, let alone improve and upgrade the minimum requirements. So why are parks and pathways millages and land preservation millages no problem to add to local taxes, but safe firefighters aren't? I don't get the outrage. I certainly don't understand the continuing sabotage of the fire department. Why are Jack and Irwin so intent on doing so? I'm very confused by one aspect of the anti-fire SAD movement. John Boyle has a proven track record of fixing failing companies. A few weeks ago, he made a long presentation about his analysis of the fire SAD. After that presentation, it was pointed out that some of his math was wrong. It was suggested that he speak to Mark Perry and resolve some of those mistakes. The mailing our family received from the anti-fire SAD group continued that bad math. Why? If getting to the truth was John Boyle's agenda, then why are the mistakes continuing and being spread to residents? Why hasn't John adjusted his analysis and brought it forward? John Boyle is a commanding presence and commands respect. So much so that even Supervisor Hathaway was afraid to shut him down after 3 minutes and allowed him to go on for another 8 minutes. I don't believe for a moment that John fixed any of his companies based on wrong information. Wrong information is the result of his presentation. Why? Did you ever talk to Mark Perry? I wish you had been more involved early on and assisted the Fire Services Guidance Committee in shaping the fire SAD. Your advice would have been very valuable. Scio residents, please remember that some of us will benefit from lower insurance because the new fire station will mean that those homes are closer to emergency services will have lower insurance. And all of us will benefit from lower insurance with an improved township-wide fire department ISO score. And then late today, I saw the mail. Chief Hood sent out a mailing that is asking for 1.94 or 1.9 mils for 2024 to begin to catch us up from all the damage done to our fire department from previous administrations. 2 more sentences, please let me finish. For our family, that means an increase of $73. That is well worth it to get our fire department back on track and keep our firefighters safe. Thank you for today's mailing, Chief Hood. I hope it is in time to undo all of the damage done by the anti-fire SAD mailings and signs. Thank you for the extra time.
Great to hear your voice, Rob.
Good to hear you. Bill Doty, you're next, followed by Pam Boyd. Go ahead, Bill.
Steve Doty from 465 Woodgrove Drive, Scio Township. I concur with Ms. Brandt and Alan Burbano about their concerns about the legitimacy of the newly defined easement with Aubrey Grove. But tonight I'm bringing a concern that I have to share with you, which is the use of an on-site underground detention basin for Aubrey Grove. In our research, it's the first time it will be used for residential purposes in our township. If you look at what was approved by the Planning Commission in March of 2022, The developer specified several bioswales to contain all of the stormwater runoff. Since the approval, they realized their error and created 2 rain gardens and several large bioswales that are connected to the new underground detention basin, which now requires an easement through Parkwood condos to the U of M lake. I ask you to take a closer look to be sure the high-density development has their stormwater calculations correct and the detention basin is reasonable to be used in a residential setting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pam Boyd, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Christy. Boyd, a Scio resident. So my husband asked a good question the other day that I don't believe has been adequately addressed by this board. And that question is, what was the purpose of the 2 board motions that prompted the lawsuit against the Scio Township Board? I'd love to have an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Is there anyone else that wants to speak at public comment? Please raise your hand. No hands raised.
In that case, let's proceed with our agenda. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve this evening. The first is for the regular meeting of September 26. Are there any corrections to the minutes, the draft minutes?
I would move the minutes.
Move the minutes as proposed. Is there a second? Okay, it's moved by Riser, support by Palmer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. Second set of minutes are for the special meeting of September 27th. Are there any corrections to the draft minutes? None. Is someone prepared to move the minutes for the draft minutes for the special meeting? Moved by Noel, support by Brazeau. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. Brings us to the consent agenda. Is someone prepared to move the consent agenda as modified when we approve the
I would
minutes?
move the agenda, consent agenda as modified.
Moved by Riser, support by Brazeau. Please call the roll.
For our rules, tonight we're starting with Noel. Noel? Yes. Riser?
Yes.
Hathaway?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Flintoff? Yes. Brazeau?
Yes.
Carrie?
Yes.
Consent agenda adopted.
Okay, that brings us to reports. First report is from our assessor. Caught you by surprise getting to you so quickly.
Most of you know me by now. Andrea Garrett, the assessor for Scio Township, my biannual report. I just want to start off by saying Thursday will be my 25th anniversary with the township. So I've been here seeing a lot of growth and a lot of change. But basically, the report is kind of giving you an overview of what has happened in our department this past couple months. One item of particular interest to a lot of people is the Scio Roads SAD tax credit. As you know, the board approved your resolution back in July and to calculate a tax credit for each parcel. The base tax credit is $263.37. This was for a parcel that has not been split, not been divided, not been combined. And actually, it took me a little over a month to compile all the information for that tax credit. And this book is for the public to see. It has the resolution, the beginning roll of 2013, how I calculated the breakdown of the tax credits, has the reasons why if a parcel was split. And I also have graphs to show if your parcel was split, then this is how we came to determine your amount. So it's up here for the public to take a look at. It'll be at the front counter in the lobby.
Have you gotten many questions from people?
Not a one, not a one. Just the largest amount, my report said is a little over $1,300. That was because a taxpayer combined 5 parcels and each parcel paid $850, so. And the smallest is $1.68. And that's due to 2 parcels combined, split into a subdivision. Over 300 parcels were created, so the math is all in this book for people to take a look at. The page, it shows how I calculated each of the refund or the tax credit amounts. It goes into a little bit of detail, but if you look at the book, or I can even post this on the website, if you follow the columns, you'll be able to understand. And if someone has questions, just ask me how I calculated that. The CPI for 2024, I don't know what it will be. I won't know until November. It may be between 4% and 5%, but I think we can all figure that out based on the price of gas, price of food, housing prices, so forth. So my best guess is between 4 and 5, but I can't promise that. Just, I mean, if it comes in at 3.9, woohoo, you know, it can't go no higher than 5.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
point of order or information.
Yeah.
You're going over this great PowerPoint you put together, is that correct?
Yes, just going right through it.
Right, and it would be nice maybe for people watching if it could be shared.
I did have technical difficulties last February, and I kind of shied away from that.
Okay.
I can post this on the website tomorrow. For
It's in
people.
the
It's in the
packet.
packet.
It is in the packet.
So I would direct people maybe to the packet to follow along, because that's where you appear to be.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm just basically following some of the highlights of the.
Page 8 of the slide deck.
Yeah, we're on page 8.
Okay, and if people at home are trying to find this in the meeting materials, it's item H1 under reports. If you click on the link, I presumably you can find the slide there.
And as soon as I get the report from the State Tax Commission informing us what the CPI will be for 24, I will post it to the website and let everybody know. March border review. Everybody was sent what I like to call my annual love letter to the residents. Because it does have my name on it now, and it is required to be on there. We didn't really get a lot of phone calls, just basically a lot of our phone calls are educational. How did you figure this out? Where did this come from? And once they understand, okay, I get it. We did have 65 appeals. 11 of those appeals were reduced based on the valuation of the property. So they supplied either an appraisal or some other type of information, which gave the Board of Review information that thus reduced their assessment on the property. Poverty exemptions, 4 were applied for, 3 were granted. Veterans exemption, we had 19, and that number seems to grow every year. We get a couple new ones each year. And these figures, basically, I just added the amounts together to give the board an idea of what the total assessed and taxable value lost as a result of the appeals or exemptions were. And the operating millage, I just calculated it, so $4,000, give or take, was the amount lost. Revenue.
Andrea, generally speaking, it looks like you've got 65 appeals, about 31 didn't get any relief.
And most people, some people don't supply information.
Okay.
Some people, when they come to the Board of Review, they don't understand, and the Board of Review will explain how it works, and they go, oh, okay, I didn't know. Because not everybody calls us. Some people don't want to talk to us before their Board of Review. Some people say, no, I want to come to the board. Okay, you know.
Is your sense that there's legitimate need that we're not meeting, or that it's just people who don't qualify?
Right. Well, it's not that they don't qualify. When they come into appeal, you can't come to a Board of Review and say, well, my taxes are too high, so I'm appealing. Okay, the burden of proof is on the homeowner to say, my value should be this number, not your number. And that is either due to a recent sale, if they had an appraisal done for any reason, which would show that their value should be less than what we have it at. That's where most of the appeals are denied. They don't provide the proper information or enough information or any at all. Again, July Board of Review. The July Board of Review cannot hear appeals based on the value of your property. They can hear appeals on, well, they're not actually appeals, but the filing of the poverty exemptions and filing of veterans exemptions. Correction of errors happened. I had one family call and said, you said we had an in-ground pool put in. We never put our pool in. We went out and checked. It wasn't there. So that's a correction of value, a clerical error on our part that we corrected. A few more poverty exemptions were applied for. One was granted. The one person, I believe, knew they might not have qualified, but they filed anyway. So they knew coming in they might not qualify, because we do have guidelines that they are required to follow that the board will be approving soon here in December or January for the next year based on federal guidance. As a result of the March Board of Review, we had some Michigan Tax Tribunal and small claims appeals filed this year. Full tribunal appeals are values in contention over $100,000, and those typically are your commercial and industrial type properties. We had 3 of those filed this year. One was an office complex on Newman Boulevard. Another one was the Wood Chase Apartments over on the southeast quadrant of the township. And then the Jackson Road Cinemas filed appeals this year.
Do you have any dark star appeals?
No. None at all. So that, usually with that is the petitioner will file a petition and we'll get notification through the tax tribunal that a full appeal was filed. Mariah Fink, our township attorney, does the answering for me. I do the workup, some numbers, I give her a number, and she does a negotiation with the other side. So that's how the back and forth keeps going like that. On a small claims appeal, those are values in contention of less than 100,000, which means, and those are typically your residential properties. That information is something that I do strictly myself. I answer the petition, I'll do the workup, I'll talk to the taxpayer to see if they want to settle or not. And then I attend the small claims hearing via telephone. And I did have one today, which was a no-show, meaning they never buzzed in. They are going to be issued a default by the tribunal. They have 14 days to cure that default to see if they want to continue on, or they'll be basically kicked out, process done. So we had 4 of those this year, so I'm working on the 4 of them. And we usually settle those, you know, try to get them settled, usually at that juncture. Tax rates for Scio Township, we're on page 17. Is basically a copy of the 4029 or the warrant, which the board looked at and approved back in June. It's just to give some more information out there for the people to see where the tax rates come from, a form that we are required to file, and that's how the county and the state knows how much money we are anticipated to collect or charge based on our millage rates. And it does not include any of the millage rates, of course, for the election next month, because at the time of this, we did not know about that. Estimation of revenue, I think I've thrown this one out there before or floated it around. It's basically a spreadsheet that I found in the computer when I inherited the job. And I just plugged in the numbers just to give the board a very general idea of what kind of money we're looking at. So it's using the tax rates. Of course, there's no Headley factor this year because of the large inflation rate. So the tax rates charged in 22 are going to be the same tax rates that we're going to have in 23.
Okay, so I'm understanding this is projected revenue for calendar year 24.
December.
For just
What's going to be on the December tax bills,
for the
these tax
December
rates
tax bill.
versus the values used, yes.
Okay.
Next couple of pages are basically just charts and graphs that have always been in the equalizer BSNA assessing software. I always thought they were kind of cool to look at every year, just to, you know, see colors in the graph and to see what percentage of types of property that we have. And basically residential property, almost 80% of our property is residential in the township, the largest class. Taxable value, of course, residential being the largest class that we have, they have the largest value. So that just kind of gives you a little graphic of how things are going. Page 23 is the assessed value by class. Pretty much even with the taxable, and of course, assessed is half of true cash value, which in theory is market value. Taxable value, though, is what you pay your taxes based on. Just to give you an idea. And then another little graph that I found is by trends. Of course, we can see the dip that happened in 2008, 2009, and we all know what happened back then. So. And then just another little graph to show you the percent of change in value from last year through 2023, to give you an idea of where the decrease or the increase in value was. Developmental has a minus in front of it. Developmental property is property that is slated for development eventually. Once a project is applied for and approved, the use of the property changes from, it's not going to be developmental because there's an approved project, so now it's going to be commercial, industrial, whatever the use was to be projected for that. So that's why there's a decrease in developmental property.
So Andrea, when you're coding properties as developmental, what point in the, what in marker do you use for that?
I look at it every year. Every year I have to look at the classification of property.
Okay.
So by December 31st. So if once the March Board of Review closes the roll and approves it and so forth, I can't, the classifications that I change won't be effective until next year. So if a large project goes in September, that was approved, it'll affect next year's numbers. And then get towards the end there, the State Tax Commission puts out a memo every year. They review the value of property in each township and city. And by law, the board is required to have a certain level of assessing on staff. And right now, this is just something I threw in there because it's the latest bulletin that we received. So Scio does meet the requirement for 2024. As far as you do not need a level 4 assessor. A level 3 is adequate according to them, and that's what I am. So I was just tooting my own horn that I passed. Just wrapping up, department wrap up, our two assessors, Sarah McCleary and Rebecca Biacco, have been working hard to get things rolling right along, and things now are rolling where, because the past year and a half, we had to kind of, I don't say fix things, because nothing was ever broken, it just needed fixed or things to run more smoothly. So in any future transitions, things will run smooth. And basically what we are working at this year is doing the assessment audit, which through the State Tax Commission is required of every county every 5 years. This is the memo that we get to know where we are in the line. We're going to be next year, 17 counties in the state of Michigan are going to undergo the audit through the State Tax Commission. They require us to provide certain reports, best practices, policies, everything needs to be written out and or posted to the website. So that's kind of where my focus is this month, because in November, the State Tax Commission is going to put on a class for us Washtenaw County assessors. And we are going to be able, they're going to give us little pointers. Hey, do this. Hey, do this, do this. So that's what I'm working on now. And I know I've spoken with Joyce as far as having some type of policies and procedures in place. So I'm already working on that because the state tells me I have to do this. So next year, I'll let you know how that goes. Other than that, that's the only, and then of course, you know where to find me. If I'm not in my office, I can be found on the website, email. So any questions? Oh, we got hands.
Why don't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Trustee Noel.
Okay, just quick clarification. Like, what's your definition of taxable value? And what is your definition of market value for a house? Just say a residence.
Okay, market value is what a willing buyer and a willing seller will pay for a house. Assessed value is technically 50% of true cash value. True cash value is what, in theory, you can look at it as market value, but don't take it for gospel, because a lot of times we get sales on houses that are a lot more than what we have them assessed at. And that's why your assessments keep going up, 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 and up. Taxable value, back on March 15th, 1994, if we can all remember that far, we voted in the state of Michigan to create both the assessed value and taxable value. Because before you paid your taxes on your assessed value. Now, the taxable value, the assessed value goes up like, you know, according to the market. It'll go up and down according to what that taxable value is, 50%, you know, boom, boom, boom. Taxable can only go up the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever's least. So for a person who's been in their house forever and a day, they started like this, their value's way up here, but their taxable is way down here. You have people who just bought their house. They're both the same. It will uncap, and I think we've all been through all that before if we bought houses and go, what's on my tax bill? Sticker shock.
So if one were to make comment, let's just say on a potential millage, you wouldn't want to use a description that included market value. would
No,
you?
taxable value.
Taxable value would be the correct way, the precise way.
It is the way taxes are calculated.
Okay.
Because you take your millage rate, if it's, okay, let's take the fire services millage, the 1.35. Back in school, we did the 1,000, you go 1, 2, 3. You have a 0.00135, multiply it by your taxable, and there's your tax liability for that particular item. That's the easiest way to explain it, because I'll never forget the move the decimal place thing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. What are some performance metrics for an assessing department? Like, what is the audit gonna be trying to measure?
To make sure that I am following the statute and the law the way it's written. They want, I don't want to call it transparency, but they want to make sure all assessors statewide are doing the same thing. Because you have your larger jurisdictions where we all kind of, yeah, we got it. You have more rural communities where the assessor isn't full-time, comes in once or twice a month. They don't do things. They don't have the information available to the people when they want it. So they want to make sure the information is out there for people to see what we do. You might not understand some of the more mathematical things, but that's why you call us and you ask us, or please come in. It's so much easier to show somebody on the computer, which a couple board members have come into my office. Once I show them, they go, okay, you know, it's more understandable to see things in person. And the audit will show us, you know, where our deficiencies are. I don't think we'll have any unless somebody just is having a good day, you know. We also get board of review. If we have a lot of appeals at the board, at the March board of review, that tells us if people aren't doing, that tells us we're not doing our job right. And the past couple of years, we have had boards of review where we would have a couple appointments a day and that's it. You know, but we have to stay open for a certain time period. And then if there are citizen complaints to the Board of Trustees about, you know, an abnormal amount, about the assessor's practices and so forth. And the thing is, I can lose my license through the state if I don't follow their guidelines. And there is a formal complaint process for the assessor through the state.
Well, Andrea, I really liked your presentation. And I know, because Yeah, I'm one of the trustees that is always bothering you and asking questions.
No, that's fine. I like
Always
doing
answer them thoroughly.
PowerPoint because it's like scrapbooking for me. It's something I understand. Okay, don't laugh a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I like the graphic, the art and learning where you can put things.
Oh, yeah, and this is very easy for anybody to read.
I've always liked things that I can see in front of me,
Yeah,
as opposed to just.
It's very sharp. Also, thank you so much for your work on the special assessment surplus, and
You're
I know
welcome.
that was a big pain in the rear.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah,
It
there
works.
you go. So I appreciate everything that you do,
Thank you.
and your department.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Are there any more questions for assessor? Thank you very much.
Just a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to congratulate Andrea for 25 years of service.
Yeah.
Yesterday was my birthday and we gave the whole nation a holiday to celebrate. It just happened to fall on that day this year, which is, it happens from time to time.
I'm told there is a gold watch on your desk.
There is, thank
I
you.
don't know
Very
for sure
much.
that.
Keep your mark. Okay, is that, my 3 minutes are up?
And then some.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you tomorrow. Oh, yeah.
Well, next up is a report on the Environmental Sustainability Climate Action Plan, otherwise known as SCAP. And Jan Culbertson from the Planning Commission and the task force is joining us. Oh, there she is.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. How are you?
Oh, there's the
yeah.
gold watch.
There it is. Jan's got it. Wait a minute.
Andrea, Jan has your gold watch.
Gotta get it from Jan.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's a long service for sure. All right, so in your packet, you have 3 documents. One is sort of a report that I wrote to give you a little history and introduction to the Environmental Sustainability Climate Action Plan, and we all say SCAP because that's a mouthful otherwise. There is the plan itself. And this plan has been through, there was an original draft in April that's been through public comment, a public hearing, planning commission, etc. And this October draft is the one that the planning commission did approve to forward to the board, recommended approval to the Board of Trustees. And also in your packet is the shortcut, which is the summary of actions, and it really is sort of a summary of the core of the plan. So what I wanted to do is just briefly, because there are obviously some newer trustees that haven't been here since 2020. So in 2020, the Planning Commission, as we were updating the master plan, really saw that there was a need to do a deeper dive into sustainability and climate action. And so a kind of sustainability climate action plan was sort of referenced in this master plan as something that would address more clearly some sustainability goals for the township. Then in this, what I'm going to call kind of a supplemental planning process, began in May, and we were we had 2 C's interns that did some foundational work. They looked at kind of the status of sustainability in Scio Township, some of the threats and so forth that we had from climate change, and it started sort of the foundation and did a kind of an educational webinar for what became the Sustainability Task Force. And that was appointed in July. And a year later, the Board of Trustees did pass a climate neutrality resolution. And that set goals for the township, which aligned with the Resilient Washtenaw Plan and the county's resolution, which is achieving carbon neutrality in township operations by 2030 and community-wide by 2035. we had then multiple 3 progress working sessions with the Planning Commission and Board of Trustee members, and all the committees from Scio were invited to those progress meetings. We did do a public hearing in August of this year. And then finally, on September 11th, updated SCAP was recommended for approval to the BOT. This really represents, almost, good 2 years of work. There were 25 task force volunteers that contributed at different times. Some people stayed through the whole process. Some people did their contributions. The intent that this is a living plan, obviously, there are going to be new resources, there are going to be new technologies, there are going to be new partnerships. So the intent is that we would at least update this plan with the master plan every 5 years. Key, I think there are some strategies for implementation in this plan. And that has to do with creating a leadership group, which would be essentially a management group along with as some key committee members to coordinate, what we're sort of going to do first, how we're coordinating operations and community actions. And I just wanted to highlight that there are some things that are already underway. There are resources for all the focus groups, and I'll touch on those within the Climate Action Plan on the website. Thank you to Mary Gillis. She's been incredibly supportive. The Planning Commission with the Carlisle Wortman is reviewing our zoning ordinance for updates. OHM is updating the engineering specifications. We have 2 members that are working with the township manager on a proposal for providing access to recycling for residents who don't have curbside service. And Carlisle Wortman is updating some of our submittal requirements to incorporate key sustainability metrics. The township enrolled in My Green Power for all of its electricity, which really almost eliminates totally our scope 2 emissions. We did get a solar at the fire station. All of you are invited to our first annual sustainability fair. We have 18 different groups that are going to be providing resources for folks. And this is all, they're all going to be categorized under those different task force sections. And the city of Ann Arbor has extended their Solarize program to township residents, and the Ann Arbor 2030 district has also extended their services, their resources to Scio. So, it's something that's been in the works for a couple of years, and people are already contributing and making progress. And I just wanted to kind of ask you if you had any questions. If you wanted to, I could pull up, the summary of actions and kind of highlight those. It's sort of up to you what you think would be the, best use of our time together, and what kind of questions I could hopefully answer for you.
Questions from members of the board? So Jan, my understanding is the hope is to have the board act on the report, to sort of officially accept it and the recommendations at an upcoming meeting. Is there anything that you suggest that we look at in particular between now and that time?
Sure. I think the summary is an excellent starting point, because really the core of the plan is the summary of actions. And if you wanted to, I could, just, I don't know if I can share my screen. Yeah, I can. So this is the, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So the summary of actions is really, looking at, we have energy, buildings and infrastructure, transportation and mobility, materials waste and the circular economy, water resources, protection and health, green infrastructure and natural ecosystems, resilience and emergency preparedness, and regenerative agriculture and local food systems. So those were the core kind of task force groups. And each of these areas have then some actions that we feel that are important to get started on. And some of those we have already done. For instance, increased township and community energy efficiency. We've already benchmarked our township operations, and we're working on reducing the energy and water use. We had our audits done, and we're working on, we did the lighting replacement. We have some other recommendations to implement. So if you go through, these are the main goals and some action steps for accomplishing them. Some of them are with township operations, and some of them are community-wide. And really, the Board of Trustees and this leadership team is, the majority of your responsibilities are working on township operations. And we see sort of the task force continuing to support the education and providing resources to the community at large. So each of these areas have some specific action steps. Regenerative agriculture and local food systems. We already had a volunteer go out and do a survey of the local farms. So now we have accurate information on this year, what was being produced on those farms. And so it's building some metrics and also connecting people with their local resources. Transportation and mobility. This will be really important, both from a zoning standpoint, as we're looking at implementing maybe EV charging ordinance, reviewing some of our, looking at transportation as a whole. How do we do the sidewalk connections? How do we look at our border-to-border trail connections? This type of thing, looking at multimodal, as well as encouraging EV adoption, and also public transportation. Water protection, and this is really key as far as both with the Huron River Watershed Council, dealing with the Gelman plume. There is a bill in the legislature currently talking about a state septic ordinance that would require inspection on a regular basis of septic systems. Green infrastructure, natural ecosystems. This has to do with our tree canopy, native landscaping, reducing turf grass, green infrastructure, meaning stormwater systems, etc. Materials waste and a circular economy. I mean, Scio is a great place for this, actually. This weekend, I don't know if you know, but the lumberjacks are having one of their wood sales. This is all from urban wood, and they turn what would be chip trees into beautiful, usable wood. We have multiple resale shops, but we can also do more as far as making recycling and composting accessible to our community. Climate resilience and emergency preparedness. It's interesting looking at the millage for the fire proposal. Emergency preparedness and climate resilience, this is where they really intersect. And that is having clear communications. I think the option that Chief Hood came up with for recruiting community emergency response team is awesome. It's how, we with our trained professionals can really be a supportive and prepared community. Then implementation, the idea is to have this leadership group that will meet quarterly and really coordinate our efforts, because everyone knows, you know, in a township, we all have multiple roles that we play, and we rely a lot on volunteers. And by having clear communications and a strong leadership, I think we can implement this plan. And this just talks about some of the near-term actions in each of those groups. So that's what I would, you know, focus on first, and then do a little deeper dive. Each of those focus areas have a vision. They have sort of the state of where we are, what we've done, and then looking at the actions and proposing some metrics to measure progress. So that's where we are. And yes, the hope is that the Board of Trustees will review this, because it does have one, you know, obviously leadership and management impacts, as well as when you're looking at funding and planning, sustainability should be one of the metrics that you look at. And that's what we're hoping for. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. And if folks want to have, you know, a working session or something on this, be glad to spend the time with you.
See, Karen.
Yeah, I suggest we have a working session, because this has been in front of the board a few times, but you know, these, you know, with our board meetings, we're cramming both a work session and our decision-making all at once, and we really don't have time to go through in detail. And I'm not going to, you know, I don't want to pass something that later on we're like, oh, how did that happen, when we did it just on the cuff. So I'm suggesting that we have a work session over this, and maybe, you know, have a two-part if something else is important, you know, have that at the work session as well.
That's a good idea.
I would support that concept, motion, idea as well.
Shall we task the township manager with finding a date for a work session to deal with this?
If somebody's making a motion.
I'll make.
I mean, I just want to, can I suggest something on that? I mean, we do need to talk about it, but I think it needs to be integrated with our CIP process and our budget process, possibly our strategic planning, depending on what you have in mind for that. But I mean, this is you all have done awesome work, Jan, and I want to thank you personally for your leadership, but all the task force members and everybody who worked on it. I think when I look at these sections, I think, you know, there's about 2 or 3 we could pick off in each section in years 1 through 3. Like when I look at that, I think, okay, what do we want to budget for this year? What needs to be built out in the capital plan? Who are we gonna, what special expertise are we gonna need to bring in? And so I would be, I don't know, not to put you on the spot, but I'd be much more comfortable like adopting like pieces of this as we go, like have it be part of every annual budget that every department, and I know, Jan, you came to our management meeting, I can't remember when it was, 9 months ago-ish, I was trying to remember the other day. I wonder if it also might be a good time to bring the department heads back together. You know, we have a new manager since then, new utility director since then, but to kind of figure out how we can build it into our operations, because something like electrifying the township fleet, you know, that's something to talk about, you know, and build into our planning documents. And then once they're in there, then you can be assured we're carrying it out. But as long as it's just in this plan, I'm concerned that going forward, we won't have any accountability for following through.
Well, that's why we need to, as a board, go through it together and before.
But I think with our department, our key departments too, Jillian, if possible.
Yeah, but the board hasn't gone through this in detail, so we don't even, I mean, other than us reading it on our own, but we need to have to, you know, we need to talk about different, and there's maybe there's other things that could be included.
So I think Jessica, you bring up a good point. I mean, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? There's a lot here. I think Jessica is right. Let's take a piece of this that we can consume, all agree on, because if we try to take all this on, then nothing's gonna get done, right? So I support that 100%. And then if you wanna have a working session on that, that's fine, to determine what those pieces are, agreed. So maybe it's kind of those two kind of, you know, clustered together with the outcome of, let's pick the top, like you said, top 5 or top 3, whatever you think we can consume in a year's time.
Yeah, if we could use the time to prioritize, if we had the right people there.
Joyce, do you feel comfortable working on scheduling a work session on this so that we can do that kind of prioritization?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
Do we want to call a special
Well,
meeting?
we need, I don't wanna hold on Jan if we don't need her
It's just
anymore,
called a
but
work
she's got a life
session.
too, so. She's done a lot of work already.
Yep, thank you, Jan.
thank you.
Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, and thank you all, and I agree, you know, you have a plan, but you also need to have that implementation strategy, so thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jen.
Jen. Thank you. So do we want to make a motion to call for the working session? Otherwise, we just have 4 more dates in 2023. That's all I'm saying. You just want to wait to get a date from Joyce and
Well,
then formalize it?
Yeah, why
Okay.
don't we find the date and
Okay.
then formalize it at that point?
Okay,
I think there's clear consensus that people want to do it, but I think it's true, we need to have the prioritization before we can really task, you know, the department heads with doing things.
Yeah, you know, you might want, I mean, the way we would typically do this my worlding is everybody would kind of come to the table with their priorities, see which ones we all agree on. Right, and then if you get enough of a cluster, then there's not a whole lot to talk about, because we all kind of have consensus on those priorities. But if everybody's different, then the conversation gets much broader. So everybody does a little bit of homework before we even go to the working session, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, read the plan. So it sounds like you want to do it this year.
Yes, I think that's what I sense from people, is that we'd like to do it this year. Certainly that would put us in a better position if there's decisions that need to be made for the budget.
Exactly, yeah, okay.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next item? So the next item is our regular reports, and there are written reports. I think the primary documents relate to the audit. So I will turn to you, Clerk Flintoff, because you are our point person for the audit.
so the audit report, there's bound copies in your inboxes. We had a special meeting to hear the presentation from the auditor on Wednesday. The letter and report are included, and then we submitted all the required reports to Treasury and have already heard back as expected from Treasury on 2 points. One is a request for a deficit elimination plan for Fund 403. That's the East Delhi SAB fund. And we were expenses exceeded revenues in that fund, and so we're developing a deficit elimination plan, and that will be before the board by October 24th. And Ally Norris is working on that. It's not a big deficit and a pretty straightforward solution. The second one is more extensive and in-depth. You'll recognize it from years past, the Treasury corrective action letter. And that's the request for a corrective action plan. And what it does is it kind of takes the 7 material weaknesses, the 3 violations of the law, and puts it together into a request for corrective actions on how we're going to address those. That's also due within 30 days. It's not required to be approved by the board. In the past, we haven't. But typically what we do is the treasurer takes on her areas and I take on my areas. We put it together. Again, this year, Ally Norris is going to draft it for us and work with us on it. So I expect that once we get it complete, we'll share it out with the board. But it doesn't require board approval before being submitted. Was there anything else on that, Joyce, that I'm forgetting?
No, I think you covered both. I think Ally's going to do the draft and then review it with the treasurer, the clerk, and once it's finalized, as mentioned, we'll make sure that everyone has a copy of it. I think the other difference is that, and I believe the comment was made during public participation about the recurring material weaknesses. One of the one of my goals is to make sure that in all of those cases, we can eliminate those issues so that they do not show up in our next audit report. So that's the goal.
So the one thing, and this was mentioned in the audit meeting, yeah, it's repeated throughout without adequate procedures and controls. So are we working on, is that?
That's part of that process.
That is part of the process,
Yes.
okay.
And I think that's the benefit really in having Plant Moran working with the township to help us build the internal controls, the process, policies and procedures, and to assist with training too.
Could we have regular reports from?
Oh, sure, we can.
And I'll say they're moving along quite well. We already had, for example, you noticed the revenue and expenditure and balance sheets you got at the last meeting. They have our current budget in place. They're bringing the books up to date, and by the next meeting, they'll have proposed budget amendments for the first 6 months of this fiscal year. So I think at every meeting, Joy, or not Joyce, Jillian, you're gonna see a work product by PMGAP at least one at every meeting.
Yes. And they're also working with us on the budget schedule in order to get that process underway.
Great, thank you.
Can I say a couple other
Sure.
items on the clerk's report? I just also want to make sure people see and hear the public hearing notice. This is really for everybody. It was noticed before, but I put a copy in it, the public hearing notice at everybody's mailboxes. We'll have that on November 14th. And the chief and PMGAP worked well together to really come together with a good proposed expenses for this first year. And the estimate is 1.9 mils total. So 1.4 operating and 0.5 capital for a total of 1.9 mils. What would be requested. On the topic of the November 7th election, that's coming along. We're having really good turnout for a mighty little special election. We've issued 2,802 ballots already. We've gotten 442 back. So we got, you know, I'm estimating we could get up to, you know, 50% turnout for this election. So that'd be about 7,500 voters total. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get probably about 5,000 absentee ballots by the time we're done. This Thursday, October 18th at 10 a.m., the Election Commission is meeting to confirm election inspectors. And then on Thursday, October 26th at 10 a.m., the Election Commission meets in here to hold the public accuracy test so that everybody can see for themselves that our tabulators tabulate accurately. So just another step that we take to ensure confidence in our well-run elections. Jillian.
I have a question. So this year is the first for the 9 days of early walk-in voting.
That's right.
And that would be here. There's no other precincts or buildings available or?
Correct.
Okay.
So for this November 7th, voters, any voter may vote absentee. Any voter may walk in here starting on Saturday, October 28th at 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Saturday, October 28th through Sunday, November 5th at 4 p.m. You may walk in here and cast your ballot, actually have it tabulated. We will not be, of course, counting or releasing the returns. We'll be suspending the polls. So it's kind of like one long election day. And so it's being tabulated. Once you put it in the tabulator, you can't spoil it. Can't say, hey, I changed my mind.
Is that the AV count board or is like a how does that?
No, that's early voting.
Got it.
So there's, yeah, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So we have three It's early voting inspectors who are being appointed for this process over those 9 days. So we'll have about 4 people assigned, or 3 to 4 for each day, going through it. And then we'll have election day. Instead of our 8 regular polling places, we've consolidated down to 6. And then we'll also have 3 absentee voting count boards. And they'll be sequestered and meeting in Township Hall on election day to count all of the AV ballots. And then at 8 p.m. on election day, when all the polls are closing down and the 3 AV count boards are closing down, then we'll come back in and close the early voting polls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like an early voting count board, but not really, right?
Not at all, because because it's not counting. It's early voting, it's not early counting.
Yeah, right. Then it gets tabulated at the end of the voting.
Right, because we don't wanna,
How long will it take to get the results, would you say, Jess? How long will it take?
Midnight.
Is it a day later or?
no, not at all. No, in Scio, it depends. I mean, certainly if all goes well, everybody is done by 10 p.m.
And you'll know by,
10 p.m.
oh, okay, all right, fair enough.
So yeah, and so, but it depends. I mean, if there's, pretty much the returns come in and they're reported on the county website. And they're counted, they're reported in by precinct. So you'll start seeing some returns come in, and it's by precinct. It's never by full township.
It's better off going to bed and waking up the next
So,
morning.
and anybody can, certainly, the polls are public space. We certainly have interested people come to Township Hall, and, you know, try to, you know, you can certainly see what the count is or get a copy of the tape if needed.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Other questions, comments? All right, let's move on to agenda item I1. This is unfinished business.
Well, can I just ask one more question? And I didn't know where we left this, Joyce. At our last meeting, we made the motion saying that we're gonna have conditional use 2309, the Curtis Commercial, come back on October 24th. Did you want us to make any change to that? This was the Curtis Commercial, and I know you and Laura had some discussion. I just didn't wanna leave this with a board motion.
Panera drive-through?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The old Panera.
Yeah. And I know we had a board
We
motion.
had a conversation about it after the meeting, and it's my understanding that our planning consultant is going to put together a summary after the planning commission meeting. And then that information will be provided to the board before making a decision related to the approval or whatever
Okay.
status.
So you still
will
plan
take
to have
place.
that on the
Yes,
October
we plan to have it
24th?
on the next
Okay.
agenda.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Which is kind of a lead into reports for planning commission. No planning commission report today because yesterday was a holiday, so we did not meet. We'll meet again the day before our next meeting, and we'll take up, as Joyce just said, the central drive-through deal there.
Formerly known as Panera.
Curtis.
All right, are we ready now to move on? If so, I would like to invite up our presenters. This is the Wild Fry Farm Historic District agenda item. And I will turn to our township manager to introduce this.
Well, as Supervisor Hathaway had mentioned, we've had an opportunity to meet with Melissa Milton Hung related to the status of the historical designation for the property. In addition to that, it was also recommended by the board as well as by Melissa to consider a realtor with specialization in that area as we move forward with the sale of the property. And so this evening, we have both Melissa and Patrick here to do a presentation and provide an opportunity to ask questions.
Great. Thank you, Joyce.
You're welcome.
We're glad to be here. I provided a slide deck in advance. Are we able to have that up?
Usually what people do is they share their screen through Zoom. I'm sorry, I should have worked that out with you first.
I can do that real quick. I'm gonna introduce myself and I'm gonna have Pat introduce himself, and then I'm gonna try to make sure that I can log into the Zoom. Is that all right?
Sorry, I didn't give you that technical background of
You know what, every time I presented to you before, I've been sitting about 2 blocks that way. I'm in my home on Pratt Road. So I've never actually come in person.
Well, welcome in person.
Yeah, thank you. As you can tell, I'm a Scio Township resident. I moved here in 2019, but I started working for Washington County in 2005. I have been serving and working in Washington County since then. For a long time, I worked for the county, and then more recently, I worked for the Michigan Municipal League. My background is in architectural history and historic preservation. I got into more economic development. That whole, if you love old buildings, you need to figure out how to pay for it type of conversation. A signature project that I'm very proud of here in the township was when I first came here in 2005, I was told that the Historic District Commission doesn't talk to the Road Commission, and the Road Commission doesn't talk to the Historic District Commission. We were able to work with a lot of people in the community, particularly the Delhi community, to be able to bring the East Delhi Bridge back into service. And it was interesting to hear you mention just that deficit. That's where we're seeing inflation happen, and I know that it can be fixed. I'm just glad to hear that that special assessment district is still in place to help retain that bridge as an irreplaceable piece of the landscape. We're here to talk about something that's similar that would hopefully go back into private hands. And so what I have done is been able to have the pleasure of advising the township on this and advising the township on how do we select a realtor who can understand the unique qualities of the resource that we're trying to put back onto the tax rolls. So I've recommended my colleague here, Pat McCauley, and he can introduce himself while I'm trying to log into the Zoom.
Hi there, my name is Pat McCauley. I'm a real estate agent at Reinhardt Realtors. I've been there about 9.5 years. And before that, I had my whole life was based around real estate. My parents did a lot of land development. They built houses, they restored houses. And then in 2001, I started restoring houses on my own. And I've done 5 historic residences for my own self since then. Bought and sold. And then I'm also the author of Historic Ann Arbor, an architectural guide that I co-wrote with Susan Weinberg. And it basically covers the architecture of the city of Ann Arbor, 375 buildings that we researched and wrote up. And I was also a member of the Historic District Commission in Ann Arbor for 7 years, which I think there's going to be some crossover here, and hopefully that's a skill set I can bring to potentially marketing this property and, you know, helping to guide people through the process of what's going to be required should they buy it. And so hopefully with my real estate background and my historic background, I can hopefully market this property to the right buyer, get it into somebody's hands that's going to have the resources and the wherewithal to fix it up and make it an asset to the township and to the county. And I'm just here to answer any questions. I don't have a presentation, so if anybody has any specific questions after Melissa's done, I'd be happy to answer those.
Well, I have some slides where you can jump in towards the end there.
Perfect.
It's more of a conversation. I'm in the Zoom. I'm looking at myself on a screen, which is awfully fun. Can you please let me share?
What's your Milton?
Milton-Plum. Seemed like a good idea 20 years ago to do that to myself.
I just want to make sure I had the right person.
That's me.
And there are materials from Patrick in the packet, so you can reference those when we get to that. But there's a cover letter with sort of proposal and a draft contract, at least the first 3 pages of the contract.
Right. Oh, that's fun.
Turn off your sound.
Yep, I'm doing that. You know, you'd think I'd know better about what I'm doing here, but thank you for letting me come in.
And we need to find those instructions we used to have on that table.
Oh, I do this all the time. I just didn't know that I
Yeah,
needed
no,
to do
it's
that.
a little quirky here.
But thankfully, I had my slide presentation set up and I was ready to speak from it. So here we are. All right, so it's a really nice building and a really nice collection of outbuildings. And so I want to talk with you about the importance of historic resources, why we got into this conversation. I can read to you the slide, but I want to talk about why we do this. We want to make sure that we can distinguish Scio Township as a place that people love to live in. And we want to have people understand why they live here for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it's convenient, close to Ann Arbor, et cetera. But also it's because we have this historic character in the landscape and a sense of place. When I was writing the report, it was really exciting for me to be able to dive into the 1888 history of Washtenaw County. And they were talking about stories that they learned from the early settlers who came here in the early 19th century, and about how this was a beautiful, beautiful place, and it still is. They named the Honey Creek because it was lined with honey trees, trees that were full of honey, because it was such a verdant and biodiverse place. I live in a savanna of oaks right off of Pratt Road that dates back to back then, or had been the subsequent growth after that. And I bet you have stories about where you live too. So we're talking about how are we retaining the record of a human landscape, and how are we enjoying the resources that we have here. We're also looking at, like I said, the legacy of the human impact in the landscape over time. And we're talking about how we're using the embodied energy that's already within these buildings that were built. The previous presenter that was talking about trying to achieve carbon reduction goals by 2030 is trying to help the township move along towards what is an inevitable climate action. And historic buildings are part of that. We can continue to have a conversation off this on some of the research I'm doing lately through my job at the Michigan Municipal League about how existing buildings take up almost 40% of carbon output. If we put them into the landfill, that doesn't help us with our carbon reduction goals. So that's one of the reasons why we want to do this. We also want to take into consideration our property values, which another person was talking about, sitting right there where Pat is, about our property values here in Scio Township and how we continue to add to the resources that we have, maintain our property, and pay good taxes on it. The return of this property back to the tax roll will allow Scio Township to capture back some taxes that they haven't been collecting for years. So that's some of the reasons why. Historic resources do give us a sense of place, a community identity, and a connection to the past. They also make economic sense and help us with our carbon goals. They're pretty awesome. So why did you have the pleasure of working with me? Well, because I had to come up with a name for my business because I don't do this very often. So I counted the number of trees in my yard, 24 oaks. And I filed an LLC to make sure that I was covered legally. But normally I volunteer to do this work. And when the township reached out to me, I asked to volunteer. But then they said, you know what, this is a little bit more work than just volunteering. So I was able to work out something here. I put together that survey report. I did the study committee report. The difference between them is survey, it's something important. The study committee, here's why, here's the research, here's the footnotes, here's all the documentation. Here's the statement of significance, here's the ordinance. And congratulations, folks. You got your third local historic district for Scio Township. I also have been doing the media attendance and some of the facilitation throughout the entire process. And now we're getting to the property information package, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So depending on how you count it, we're 75 to 85% done. Pretty good for having just started working together in 2021. If you know anything about historic districts, that's almost lightning fast. Because it's just a simple, 15-step process. No, it's not simple. But one of the things that Scio Township gets to enjoy here is the fact that you have a countywide historic district that through your own tax dollars that pay for county work, they're going to provide the monitoring for the township. The township doesn't have to do this. Township already actually has the Delhi Bridge and Gordon Hall already under monitoring by the local historic district commission, which I used to staff for 12 years. They help you get through this process. And where the green circle is where you started working with me. That's where the township asks the county to please help do this research. And you hired me to do that. And then we created an ordinance that is proposed and we put it into place. Seems simple, but it was pretty Pretty arduous conversation over there at the county, but we finally got it done. I don't like that slide, let's move on. So what are we doing here? We have done this historic designation. This ordinance gives us durable protection to prevent demolition. I was on LinkedIn a couple of days ago just talking about how people are shocked that they took down St. Patrick's Church right next to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra Hall. Because what was on the National Register, wasn't it protected? No, it wasn't. That's just kind of an honorific, you get a nice gold star type of thing. If you want to protect a building from coming down, you've got to do a local historic district ordinance, and y'all did it. It's in compliance with state law. And one of the things that Washtenaw County has, unlike any other county in the state, like I said, is you have the ability to designate rural local historic districts. Most of the other historic districts are in cities. But here, you have the opportunity to protect rural properties. And there's a lot of farmsteads across the county that have partaken of that opportunity. It's not a weird thing. So like I said, September 20th, 2023, congratulations, you have a new district. What are our next steps? Well, check mark, we've created a local historic district. Up next, affidavit on the deed or a conservation measure of some type. I know there was discussion over conservation easement or a deed restriction. It's my understanding that the township is selected to move forward with a deed restriction. So that is something that will occur. It will be something that will show up in all of the title paperwork when you're doing your due diligence to do a transfer of title. Anybody ever bought a house before? Yeah, pretty much everybody, right? Stack of papers. People read through there and they make sure that they understand any encumbrances on the property. And that will be there to indicate not only a deed restriction on the property size, which is 5.07 acres, as well as its historic designation and its ordinance. It'll be right there. We're going to be next after that, building a property information package, and I'm gonna go into that in just a second. And then publicly listing for sale. Everybody wants to get to that part. So what about a deed restriction? Why do we need more protections? Didn't we just do a local historic district designation? Yeah. However, by right, because it's a smidge over 5 acres, given its current zoning of agriculture, technically it can be split. Technically. It's my understanding that the township would like to retain the size of that parcel for whomever purchases it. And they're very interested in how this aligns with the township master plan and natural features management plan, particularly that buffer that it gives around Liberty Pond nature area that has recently been created. So this is consistent with the buy, protect, sell strategy that the township has precedent to do. They would like to see that parcel remain intact. And we want to see it work hand in glove with the local historic district. This all can work together. I want to make sure before I move beyond this slide, if you have any questions about that part.
I think we might just want to have more discussion about that part, but I don't have questions.
Put a pin in it then. Yeah. Preparing for sale. One of the things that I do at my day job over at Michigan Municipal League is I work with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to remove development barriers so that sites can be turned around. If it's a historic building, if it's a vacant parcel in a town that needs new infill, et cetera. And frequently what we do is we do an environmental assessment, or we'll make sure that their survey documents are in place, or we'll do architectural drawings, or we'll all kinds of different things. It's called pre-development assistance. And then we put together a package where we require people to say, hey, I want to buy this and here's how I'm qualified. Or let's have a conversation about what we're going to do with the property. And request the proposals. I called it a request for proposal. Sometimes people call it a property information package. So that's what we're calling it here, because what the township is going to be doing is putting this information out there publicly and asking for people to say, hey, I want to buy it. I would recommend that in working with Pat McCauley here, that you take this information, including an environmental assessment, land survey docs, updated aerial photos, protections disclosures, so that there's no surprises and you put it together, or you let me put it together for you, as I've said I would. And what we do is we establish a values-based rubric in selecting who's gonna buy it. I recommend that you don't take the highest bidder. It may be that they are the best bidder, but don't automatically take the highest bidder because, to be honest, the township doesn't have a lot of money invested in this property. It has some, but not a lot. And so what you would be retaining, or you would get back, is gonna already pay back the investment that you've made. Looking longer term, getting the person who's going to be the steward for the property to care for it, make sure that it's in good repair, add to the value of the township by taking good care of the property. That's really who you're gonna be looking for. Because once they purchase it, as long as it fits within agricultural zoning, which it is, it will be their private property and they can do what they want, as long as it's within the historic district's reviews and they don't try to split it. You have an opportunity to pick a really good steward. I'm recommending that we develop something that allows you to select the best offer, not necessarily the most lucrative. Because there's gonna be a lot of work that needs to be done here. I don't think that was exactly a bomb that hit the silo, but it's gonna need some work, guys. So they don't need to invest all their capital in property acquisition. That's what I have for you.
Thank you very much for all of your work to get us to this point and for a very thorough report. And Patrick, do you want to add anything to the letter that you presented us with?
No, I'm just here to answer questions. I mean, I think hopefully that sums up what I would propose to do, how I propose to market it. And I think, again, working with Melissa, I think finding the right buyer is going to be the challenging part, and finding somebody that's can actually take on this project. After walking the site and going into the buildings with Will, it's gonna be a project, and I think that's gonna be the tough part. And trying to navigate the historic district is gonna be the challenging part too for any buyer, because just the sheer amount of work, and some buildings perhaps may need to be demolished depending on you know, how and again, that could be a challenging part of the process for anybody going through this, is, you know, getting if parts of the barn, potentially the north part of the barn, the big dairy barn, the sheds, you know, they may need to be demolished, and they would have to go through that process because they are contributing buildings. There was one non-contributing building on the site that could be demolished, I think.
That machine shed needs to.
The machine shed, yeah.
What do you mean by contributing or not?
So, well, you wrote the report, so.
You know what you're talking about.
So, whenever you set up a historic district, so for instance, I've been on study committees where there are certain parts of the neighborhood, for instance, which is how that usually would be done, where there's a non-contributing building in the neighborhood. It was built outside of the period of significance. It's maybe structurally compromised and falling over or something like that. And the historic district, while a non-contributing building would still fall into the purview of the historic commission, it's a different standard for demolition or renovation. So for instance, when I was on the historic commission in Ann Arbor, we would get an application for a building on the Old West Side Historic District that was non-contributing, and there's a lot more leeway about what you can do with that building. You could demolish it, you can renovate it, you know, not necessarily to the historic district's normal standards they would apply to a contributing structure. It's just it's a different categorization. So any contributing building is going to be held to a higher standard, and there's going to be a different kind of thought process, I think, that goes into what can be done with that.
I'll add on to that. So using your example of the Old West Side, the period of significance for the Old West Side, I don't know chapter and verse, but it's late 19th century, right?
To 1941.
1941, good. So, see, I told you he knows what he's talking about. But what if we looked at like a 1970s contemporary style home? And it fell into disrepair because I'm getting old and I was born in the 70s, so it must be getting older, so. But what we're talking about is, what if something needed to happen to a 1970s contemporary home that was in the middle of the Old West Side? If somebody wanted to take it down, they could, because it didn't necessarily add to the fabric of that district. But whatever gets put back there in its place would probably have to go through, well, it would have to go through a design review. Because what you're adding back in will impact the cohesion of the district. Similarly, with the Wild Fry Farm, it's a multiple resource local historic district because it has the house and lots of outbuildings. There are non-contributing resources like that machine shed that, in my opinion, needs to come down. There's also some resources that are contributing because they're old and historic, but they're not very structurally stable. I wouldn't want to go in them. I did not go in them. I took a picture from the outside, did not enter the building. So that's gonna need work. And the way that we demonstrated that historic significance is it showed up in previous historic documents. We also noted in the inventory that these are structurally unstable and they may need to be reconsidered. We had a preliminary conversation with the Historic District Commission to make sure that people were aware of that prior to its designation, so that we were trying to give the potential future owners as much leeway as possible to make the decisions that they can afford and want to do for the property.
So on the 5.07 acres, I'm just, so this is great. This is the first time the board's had a chance to talk about what we might want to do with this property beyond, the designation. And thank you for all your work, getting it to be historic district. So I understand it protects only the buildings. We got 5.07 acres. It's adjacent to our preserve. So I'm wondering, has the Parks Committee or anybody talked about us keeping that portion and adding it to the preserve, or just kind of trying to do deed restrictions on what future private owners can do? And I just wanted to say what would be the, I know Mariah mentioned in one of our meetings, like the deed at this point, this would be the time to put any restrictions in place that we would want. And I guess my first question is, why are we keeping it 5.07 acres? Do we have a goal to preserve? Should part of that come into the preserve, is one idea. And I was just wondering if anybody's talked about that possibility.
Well, I think that's the question that I have, is what does the board want? I don't think that there's been at least not to my knowledge, there hasn't been a long discussion about what it is that the board wants to do.
So, I just have to say, when I hear keeping a 5.7 acre and then saying we're gonna restrict what a future private owner can do on it because we want a buffer to the preserve, well, why have we considered just making that part of the preserve if it is important, to keep that natural area? Have we considered just bringing that into the preserve?
Other than, does that impede the sale of the property by making the property smaller? Does it, making it 5 acres, make it a more saleable, marketable property?
Yeah, what's the right size for
A
market?
couple of points, but you have some as
I
well.
can answer that question, the first part of that question about the discussion within the township that led to the size, the boundaries on it. So originally, when the township purchased the farm site, it was on a larger parcel. The Parks Advisory Board, because it was sort of in the middle of nature, the area that the township had designated for a nature preserve, was the body that sort of dealt with this question probably the most actively. And it was in that body where the discussions occurred about, how to do this, how to move this forward. And it sort of emerged from there, and it emerged also from the Land Preservation Commission, because Jacqueline Corteau, who was on the board at the time, was our board rep to the LPC, and along with Alec Jerome. We actually had 2 board reps for a while on the LPC. And so that they moved that idea forward. We did a land division back in the earliest days of this particular board of trustees, and trimmed that farm site down. So in a sense, we did exactly what you're talking about, Jessica. The board,
Yeah.
the Parks Advisory Board said, this is too big of a site, we need to move some of this land into the nature preserve. We want to tighten it up around the farm site. So that discussion did occur, and the decision at that point was to, downsize it to a 5-acre parcel. That seemed the right size to encompass both, all of the farm buildings and the activity that had sort of, left behind some residual deposits, some of which we just dealt with by removing all the discarded tires. But if someone were to use it as a farm, a 5-acre parcel would allow them to do that kind of farming.
Or farm stuff.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a
An event
major
farm.
farm, but it's enough land so that someone could do farming on it if they chose to just do that.
Well, and I think too, so from a real estate perspective, one of the biggest, I think, hurdles of this property is the number of outbuildings. And what do you do with all of those outbuildings? And I think, and again, I'd have to look more closely at the township ordinance on, say, livestock. I don't know what's required. But what are the uses of these buildings? Obviously, probably not a party barn. It sounds like that's been a controversial.
Let's not even go
We're
there.
gonna have to build that into
Let's not even
the
go
deed
there.
restriction.
Somewhere else.
Be here till midnight.
Sorry. I will not bring that up again. I will not mention party barn ever again. But, there's chicken coops and, all of these outbuildings that, are really just a liability to most people. I mean, well,
Are they spread across the entire 5?
The outhouse.
The cluster that's
Yeah,
set towards
so
the house. You've got
I don't
the
know if
report
there's a map in the report that shows basically all the buildings. And it's a lot, and I think that's gonna be, from a real estate perspective, that's gonna probably be the biggest turnoff to a potential buyer is that.
It's not in the.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, this is from the study report. There's a aerial showing all the buildings and they're labeled. And shows which ones are contributing, which is pretty much all of them, except for the machine shed in the back, which has kind of been hacked in half. So finding some viable use for these buildings, I think, for any potential new owner is going to be important. And I think if you could use them as a small hobby farm or some sort of a small farm, that would probably be the best use. So I think, having an agricultural zoning probably is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think it sounds like it meets what the township is setting out to do with this property, is keep it.
5 acres is about right. It's about
Yeah.
sized right. Okay.
I would add, I'm so sorry. Okay, I would add that historically, the entire farm parcel contained about 124 acres. That's big. And by the time that the township acquired it, it was much smaller. There, according to the Parks Commission, according to the, what was the term that was used? Parks did an analysis. Parks did a biodiversity survey. Parks focused on where is the richest area that is undisturbed. And then they chose the Liberty Pond area for the protection of open space and public access. Because there's so much heavy contamination on the property, because it was stripped of its topsoil, it was abused by the Batesons, and there was a lot of brownfield and other toxic waste activity that took place there. Like Will said, there were a bunch of tires, etc. It's not rich land. However, that doesn't prevent it from having farming types of activities on site, because you can have raised bed hoop houses, you can have other types of growing types of operations. I'm somewhat connected to the local food systems, and so are you. And we know that there's a lot of people who are trying to gain access to land so that they can have truck farms that are nearby. That is one possibility, particularly because you have a small operation that continues to be very successful almost directly across the street, which is White Lotus Farms. So you see this White Lotus Farms. So you see this continuing to happen in our community because it's really close by to a lot of people who can afford to support local community agriculture. That's one possibility. Another reason why I think that it would be useful for us to continue to have it be this size is for the reasons why it was stated here. And because of the fact that if you get it much smaller, you're not allowed to do those types of activities as easily.
I think we're okay with the I don't think
Okay.
anyways. We're
That's
good.
clarifying. Thank you.
So I have got a couple comments. We haven't really discussed these issues as a board previously, and some of them are significant. I said I wasn't gonna have any questions, I'm sorry.
Come on, when your brain's rolling.
That's good. That's why we're here.
But this, you've got notation that this is consistent with buy, protect, sell strategy. Well, we don't know that we necessarily are going to want to do that. And I'm wondering, I mean, what if you get a prospective buyer that wants to have just a traditional purchase and that you want to live there and, you know, renovate the house? But maybe they don't want to do buy, protect, sell.
Well, trustee Noel, and just, in a sense, we've already embarked down a path. It's not exactly the same as the LPC, but by putting the historic district in place, that's, in a sense, the protect step.
That's what he means.
But isn't, people live in historic district homes without the same buy, protect, sell
Well, it's just,
strategy?
it's, no, it's,
It's a mistake
yeah.
that I use that term.
Yeah, it's just, it's a different application of the term. It's not wrong. I think that when typically with buy, protect, sell, we've used that for farms we've
Yes.
purchased with open space funds. That has a purpose of doing that. But Kathy, if I could, what they're using is the protect is what we just achieved, which is getting the historic district status, and now we're gonna sell it.
Okay.
We could put further restrictions
we
in the
didn't buy
deeds
it.
if we, in the
Fell into
deed
our
if we
hands.
want.
Yeah, you just characterized it this way and it.
I apologize. I was the one who put together the slides. And honestly, one of the reasons why I wanted to live in Scio Township is because of your history of doing just that with the buy to protect child sell strategy. I was impressed by that. And I thought it was wonderful that we're doing this project, which emulates that model.
Well, it's only been done on a few parcels.
I know.
Sure, sure. Well, I don't want to cut you
I don't,
off.
I really don't
I'm
want to
done.
cut anyone off either. So wouldn't we want to leave the details of how that happens to our township council?
Yes, but at some point the board will need
No,
to
I-
discuss so we can
I agree,
advise.
whether it's, I meant the details, once we know the approach, I guess.
Maybe this should go in a work session.
So I mean, John, if I could, I think there's some big things like, do we want to keep the parcel intact? It sounds like the recommendation
Yeah.
is to do that, but deed restrictions, I mean, so I guess my question for Mariah is if it stays zoned agricultural, 5.07 acres, could you describe some of the many things an owner could do? Could they, I mean, they could apply for they could split it, they could apply for a CUP for an event space.
Right.
They could
Right.
apply for a CUP for anything.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the opportunity that the township has now in crafting deed restrictions?
Right, I mean, it's unique because right now we have all the power of what happens with that
Right
property.
now.
Right now. And that's why I like deed restriction a little bit more than conservation easement. Because the deed restrictions, you know, when Patrick starts to market it, he would already have all of that. So he would say to any prospective buyer, this, you can't do this, this and that, because this is what the deed is gonna say. The deed is gonna say you can't split it. The deed's gonna say you can't have an event space
Yeah, like agritourism, I mean, like when you talk about a hobby farm, way out there, somebody's gonna wanna have a business attached, so can you, I mean, what would that look like?
There are some things that you can't restrict, like if someone had a farm market stand under the Right to Farm Act, I think we probably couldn't restrict that.
Sure.
But there are a lot of other things that we could restrict.
Such as, like, what are some likely things that a buyer might wanna do that we might wanna restrict?
Well, I think the most important thing is the uses, restricting uses if we want to do that, like the conditional uses. And splitting the property.
Well, we might also want to consider a restriction for large animals like tigers or something like that.
Wild animals, yeah, I
Um,
think of
wild
binding,
animals,
yeah.
right, this is an issue
That's true.
that Lodi Township is struggling with right now. And an issue that I've talked to Doug Luan and Joyce about for our ordinances.
Like an animal rescue?
No, this is wild animals.
No, it's like an animal
So-
zoo.
So your point, I mean, these are all good points. We're not gonna
Yeah.
get to this tonight, so why don't we maybe get a list and get a list to you of all the considerations and then meet on that later? Get a consolidated list, because you made some good points. I didn't know about the wild animals.
You
Well,
won't
I
need
haven't
to
talked to you
know,
about that issue.
assuming Patrick that assuming Patrick that the board approves going forward with you acting as our realtor for this. You wouldn't need to know the deed restrictions immediately. You would presumably work with us.
Once it's listed, I think that would be the point where the deed restriction should obviously be in place, just so there's an expectation, or buyers have a good expectation of what they're gonna be looking at or bidding on.
So we have a couple of steps before we are actually doing the listing.
And it sounds like there's some interesting questions I didn't even think about yet, wild animals, I'm not sure. And I wasn't I need to look closer at the Scio Township ordinances about livestock and things like that, because I mean, does somebody wanna have horses, you know, can you have, how many horses can you have there? Stuff like that, questions like that, that
I mean, I don't want to, but I mean, Mariah, I mean, if it's ag and it's over 5 acres, people can do a lot.
there are generally limits to the number of
This is not the
animals
city
based on the
hall,
acreage.
We do have limits on acreage,
What do you think, it's 2 horses on 5 acres?
if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
All right, we're not gonna figure out the minutia tonight, so.
But let's add it
To
to
your
the
point,
work
let's figure
session.
that out.
But I think part of
Add
it
those
is,
two, and that's
it is
seriously.
minutia and it's not. It's sort of like, what's the vision for this? Because I've heard a lot of things float, like who's gonna be a good neighbor? And I have to say, I just wanna ask, why wouldn't we demand the highest price? If we get all the restrictions in, right, we want a good buyer, somebody who can definitely keep it up, understands the requirements, isn't it our obligation to take
It's a
the
recommend-
highest bidder?
It's a recommendation, particularly because we understand that there's gonna be a substantial investment that's necessary in the property. It's,
And we wanna make sure we sell to somebody who can make that.
that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Oftentimes in the deals that I do with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and other municipalities, not townships, league members, we recommend that the price be either lowered or in some way negotiated as part of the package of financing that we know that the buyer will need to have to properly care for or to do the project, to carry out the vision. So if we're draining all the resources for property acquisition, that means they can't put money into fixing the place up.
Okay.
You know, to your point, you can't just make this arbitrary, like, we feel you're gonna be a better person that, you know, there's gotta be some hard metrics
fair.
here.
That's
that
what we
have,
suggested
either
the rubric.
Credit score, I don't know what it is, or assets or something to that effect.
That's
To
what-
Jessica's point, cause then it looked like favoritism, you gotta,
Melissa's point too, she was saying you're gonna have a rubric for evaluating potential buyers. And that rubric will help to guide the decision, so that you won't be making an arbitrary, we like you because you look.
right, exactly.
whatever.
You don't want that.
Defensible decision making.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay, and then what about like, in terms of possible buyers, like, I guess I'm also thinking about like lodging. Like,
Yeah, I was just thinking too, like, we'd probably wanna restrict like a short-term rental kind of thing. Probably wanna restrict from a bed and breakfast.
yeah, I mean, I
Really
think we
want
should ask
single
ourselves,
family.
do we want to? Do we want single family? Do we want, I mean,
So Mariah, why don't you start with like a core list, pass it around and maybe everybody kind of chucks onto the list of, hey, things to consider. And then maybe we get back together and kind of go down that list. 'Cause I mean, again, I would have never thought of wild animals in a million years.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
but I think about like
So-
a bed and breakfast, in some ways that can be nice, like why, you know, is that bad? Is that good? I mean, that's not a bad business out
No,
there,
if
is
it's
it?
fine, but like I said, it's not a huge bed and breakfast, maybe it's limited to X amount of people or something like that, a 5-bedroom or whatever.
Would that be a?
I'd like to hear from the realtor too.
Bed and breakfast, and also the building, the house must stay. So a lot of times the old houses, they split into an apartment. That could be a restriction or not.
You know, I would recommend that a lot of these details be discussed with your planning consultant, because they could probably very quickly just go through eventualities with you and then allow you to understand what could quickly be put together to address your concerns. Carla Wortman can do that.
And I was just gonna add, I would be a little cautious about too many restrictions, because the thing about this property, and again, this is from a real estate perspective, but also my wife and I, 4.5 or actually almost 5 years, actually was 5 years ago now. We purchased a similar property. It had been abandoned for 5 years. It has outbuildings that are in horrible condition, not like a fraction of the work that this one is gonna require. I think because, I mean, there's a giant dairy barn that, you know, I mean, that's gonna be $100,000+ probably going into that dairy barn. It's either gonna have to be a very wealthy individual or somebody that can do something creative with the site. And have that make sense. How does that make sense to have, because you have to restore it because it's in the historic district unless you can get a permit or a notice to proceed to demolish it from the commission. There, it has to make sense. Like, what do you do with a giant, what do you do with a giant dairy barn that, you know, if you're not gonna have a herd of cattle, which, or a party barn? Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's gotta make sense financially,
It has to-
right, for the person, and so we gotta talk about this.
Well, that's my only caution, and again, this is all Scio Township's decision about how they envision this process, or this property being, you know, fixed up for the future. But it's gonna be, it's an interesting site with, and I think the limitations are the sheer number of agricultural buildings that, what do you do with these? And that, so when my wife and I were looking at properties, it took us about 10 years to find this place. We looked at so many properties that had, you know, again, 8 outbuildings, and you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of roofs, that's a lot of painting, that's a lot of repair. What do you do with all of those outbuildings in a modern context? And in this case, unlike most of the ones we were looking at, we could have just torn them down. You can't tear them down. So, or in all likelihood, you can't tear most of them down.
So do you think it's likely that many of the buyers, if not, you know, who don't just have all the money, are gonna want to be able to purchase this and be able to have some business?
I don't know. I don't know. And again, I don't know what kind of business makes sense out there. Again, some sort of a agritourism business probably makes sense, but I don't know, it doesn't sound like that's what the township's looking for. And I think that's what you all need to discuss and decide, is what are the limits that we want to put on this. I think from a real estate perspective, there would be no limits. You know, if you wanted to just get top dollar, there would be no limits on it, and they could tear down any building they want, but clearly that's not the goal here. So the fewer limits, the more money it will be, more it'll be worth, and the more options that a potential buyer would have to make it make sense to restore all these buildings.
Mariah, can we make a change? Okay, so like we list the property with these deed restrictions. A buyer approaches us and says, I want to do X, but it's not, you know, the return on investment is just not there. Can we go back and change those restrictions?
Yeah, because we're not recording the deed until the purchase is made, but the idea is that the property, you set what your deed restrictions are gonna be on the front end, but until that deed is recorded.
So we've got some agility there.
Yeah.
Second question is, it's historic, kind of, Jessica, your point, it's a historic district, and we've got 8 buildings, and we say, okay, look, it's gonna cost us $2 million to modify 8 buildings. Nobody's gonna do that. They'll modify 4 of those buildings and tear 4 of them down. Now this registered as a historic district, can we tear 4 of them down if it just doesn't make sense or not?
Yeah, this is a question from Alyssa, and I was wondering about that too. I mean, I know that non-contributing buildings can be removed, but are they required to restore that? No, they're only required if they're going to do any work, they have to get approval of the work.
Yes,
correct?
you stated that well. So for all of these resources on the contributing list, you don't have to do anything to them.
Right.
You don't have the ability to make any material alterations other than regular maintenance without review by the Historic District Commission. What requires a material change would be something that would trigger a permit. If you trigger a permit, then it's review.
So for example, the silo has a big hole in it. The silo could continue to stay with the hole in it.
Correct.
So the person that buys, I think this is important for the board to understand. The person that buys it doesn't have to fix all of those.
Well, let's say they wanted to, but let's say I'm gonna go restore my house, I'm gonna do all that money, and now I'm gonna have this silo with this big hole in it. I don't want the silo with the big hole in it.
No, I agree with you.
But I don't think I can tear it down. Can I tear it down?
It's listed as a compromised enclosure on this report, meaning it's already been flagged to the Historic District Commission that there needs to be a conversation.
So potentially.
Potentially.
But the other thing too, and this, when I was on the commission in Ann Arbor, this almost never happened, but I mean, the Historic Commission can take legal action against a negligent homeowner that's allowing their buildings to fall, to basically demolition by neglect is what we always called it. So I mean, I don't know if the Washtenaw County Historic District Commission has the stomach to take on something like that. Ann Arbor did in a couple cases where there was just an egregious, the homeowner just wasn't doing anything, and you can basically take legal action against them and force them to stabilize the building. Obviously, there are a few, and Melissa probably has a little bit more experience on this front, but obviously there are buildings on that site that are, I think, from a marketing perspective, we need to, make sure they're secure, that people can't go in them. They're that dangerous.
But stabilizing the buildings and really like rehabbing them up to, a beautiful historic barn that someone wants to spend a lot of time in, two different things.
Yeah, I'll add on to that the Washtenaw County Historic District Commission, like I said, has a number of agricultural properties in its portfolio. There are a couple of those properties that have multiple outbuildings that are in states of disrepair. And what is in the process of happening with a lot of those properties is when they were acquired by a change of hands, such as the Conant Farm out in Salem Township. When new owners purchased it, what they did is they took existing documentation and then they developed, for lack of a better term, a capital improvements program for their property. And they're incrementally working through it. It isn't like, bam, you have to fix it right now this year. It's a conversation where the staff member for Washtenaw County Historic District Commission has a relationship with those property owners, because there's only like 15 historic districts. They do a site visit every year. They say, hey, how's it going? Let me tell you about these historic tax credits. Here, help me figure out if you need an architect or if you need craftspeople who can do this work with you. And they receive that support. And in doing so, they are continuing to take care of the property as they can over time, carrying out their plans for their property. That's the precedent for the county. I can't tell you what they're gonna do in the future, but that's what they've done for decades.
And I just wanted to flag, I'd like to get more info too from Anna Cohn, our Parks Director, at some point about kind of complementary, that it's gonna be a neighbor to Liberty Pond. I remember we put in the big parking area where a bus could turn around, because the idea wasn't a party bus, but it was, the idea was that it'd be a school bus, with, kids and field trips, using that area. So I just want to know.
It has been traditionally a place where field trips from schools in the area have come, including Ann Arbor schools. So that's part of the reason we put the parking lot there, is so that they would stop parking on Wildwood Lane, and they would have a sort of a designated trailhead.
When we talked, I've met with Anna, and when we've talked with Anna, her take on the property is that she's glad that there's cleanup work that's taking place on the Wild Fry Farm. And in her view, that it positively impacts the Liberty Pond because of watershed, because of that buffering, because we know that in taking over the property, the township has removed negative activities on the site that are non-conforming and is opening up the opportunity for additional uses that are conforming within its zoning.
Have you seen this report?
Well,
Yeah.
the report was
Yeah.
distributed at an earlier
Yeah.
meeting. That's why it's very long. I didn't want to put it in the packet
Yeah,
again.
I agree. It's worth looking at again, though, if it's been a while since you've seen it, because it's a great report. Yeah, and it really has a lot of nice information in it, so.
Well, I can send, I think you have it available online. I can send out the link and we can provide the link on the website as well for members of the public.
And I have offered multiple times, any of y'all, you're welcome to have conversations with me to answer any of your questions. And I'm sure Pat is able to be reached to Zion.
Well, I think, you know, it was your idea, actually, Clerk Flintoff, to bring in a realtor, and I think it was an excellent idea. And I think Patrick is a good find, very aligned with this particular property in terms of your skills and experience. And I was gonna make the model motion in order to sort of move us along here, to authorize the township manager to enter into a contract for real estate services from Patrick McCauley for the purpose of selling the township's farm property located at 7970 West Liberty, with the language of the contract subject to review and approval by the township attorney. Is there a
I'd
second?
offer an amendment.
Oh, well, we have a second from Mark Rizzo,
Well,
trustee Rizzo.
This
What's
this
your,
is just for the,
Friendly amendment.
yeah,
for Patrick, right?
Yeah, I would,
For the
say, with a condition or with an understanding that the listing comes back to the board for approval.
oh, yeah, I think, yeah.
Because I believe by that, is that right, the listing?
Yeah, there's
That
other-
By that
there's-
point, we would have the,
There's other
the
steps that the
restrictions.
board would approve. This is just a step of engaging Patrick's services to help us
I
with.
mean, we still need to have pricing and there's a lot of discussions I think that still need to happen.
Sure. Sure. I'm just trying to identify the points that it needs to come back to the board without holding up the process, but I think that the listing would be, I think that's the right point.
Well-
To get the deed restrictions in place.
We're not ready to list yet.
Yeah, it's, if you look at the letter that Patrick provided, there's all sorts of steps that would involve board input.
Yeah, we need to have a criteria in place for what the board is looking for from any particular offer or proposal that potential buyers are bringing in. There's a lot of steps there I think we need to work through together to make this as seamless as possible and to do it right.
So how many steps would there be for the board then?
I'm not sure that's an answer you can give.
Well, if you look at the second page of Patrick's letter, it lists all of these different steps that he would help the township with.
Absolutely.
And I think a number of them would involve input from the board. Are you concerned that somehow by engaging Patrick, we are sort of giving up our control over the?
Not at all. I wanna, in fact, make sure that we just have, the one or two key points we need to be involved, so that we just all have a shared
It
understanding.
just said there's
of
a
the
final,
process.
final approval, I think to your point, as long as you say final
Yeah.
approval has to be by the board, everything can go in the meantime, who cares?
Yeah,
So it'll be a
I don't
final
know that
approval.
we need to, I looked at this scope of work as your scope of work that we would be approving tonight. And so I just wanted to make sure that there was, one more time before the board.
At least.
Oh, for the listing agreement?
Yeah,
or
do you
the
want, so is
agreement?
that what you want
Yeah.
to say, is your friendly amendment with the understanding that the board will continue to be involved
Yeah, no,
in
and-
preparation of the listing?
And frankly, Will, it's just, if it's just the listing, it's just the listing. It doesn't need to be at least. I just want to kind of define the next steps to finish this process. It certainly doesn't need to come back 3-4 more times before the board. I was thinking once, but it might be twice.
Well, I think at least twice, because I would imagine that we would have input prior to the listing.
Okay?
And then I would imagine that the board would have some say over the final.
We'd approve the final agreement.
Final agreement with a purchaser.
Okay,
And there may be other
Right.
steps in between, but I think those
Okay.
two steps for sure.
okay.
Joyce, you probably would know, well, we have the two here, but anything else that comes up that should come in front of the board, you would be aware of.
Well, and
Those things
I
would
think Will is correct. The next step is actually to put together the draft or the proposed listing agreement. And I think as part of the listing agreement, information related to any type of restrictions will be included. And you'll have an opportunity to review that, and if there are changes, we can certainly have those changes made. So I think that's the next step in the process, so that everyone is comfortable with the listing.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. So are we good with the model motion as it is, or did you want to add additional?
With that friendly amendment, if we could, with the condition that the listing comes back to the board for approval.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
And could you repeat the motion so that Joyce knows what she's saying?
Because that's my thing.
So the model motion would be to authorize the township manager to enter into a contract for real estate services from Patrick McCauley for the purpose of selling the township's farm property located at 7970 West Liberty, with the language of the contract subject to review and approval by the township attorney, with the listing coming back to the board for approval.
I second, so I think we just now.
We just, unless there's further questions, we can go ahead and call the roll.
At what stage do we put the limitations in place regarding the parcel?
Joyce,
Before
we've
the
addressed
list.
that, we
Yeah.
are out of the room.
We already talked about that.
It's okay, John, it's before the listing, so we'll put it in place. And then I imagine the listing with all the potential deed restrictions, that decision comes to the board.
Back to
Thank
the
you.
board, yes.
Thank you. Nope, I had a.
I'll call the roll.
Okay.
I don't wanna know, John. Noel? Yes. Riser?
Yes.
Hathaway?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Flintoff? Yes. Brazeau?
Yes.
Carrie?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to come see you.
Thank you.
For
Thank
the
you.
conversation.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Patrick.
It's my pleasure.
And I think you all have my contact information, and you definitely have Melissa's, so if you have any questions, we're here to answer them, so.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Okay, well, that moves us on to item J6 under new business, which is also the township manager's item. So that's approval of the strategic planning process.
So the board requested that I spend some time taking a look at potential facilitators that could work with us related to strategic planning. And it came up during a discussion with trustee Carey, who had suggested that we do something more comprehensive as far as developing a plan and having involvement with our boards and commissions. And so what is included on the agenda is a proposal to look at a planning process and to utilize a facilitator. Sorry. Utilize a facilitator to assist with the process. And so it's being recommended that we proceed in that manner. There are also some dates stated in the communication. However, in discussion with our clerk Flintoff, it was suggested that perhaps we have the planning session after the election because of all of the involvement with getting ready for the election.
Thank you.
Don't you quite well.
Well, thank you for doing the work of finding a facilitator. I think it's exciting that we're gonna do this development work together. Is someone prepared to make the model motion?
So moved.
Support. Moved by Flintoff, support by Riser, to approve a strategic planning process for the Board of Trustees, staff, and board and commission leadership, and authorize $3,000 of General Fund 101 for this purpose. So this is also involves money, so this would be certainly a roll. Call
Noel?
roll.
Yes.
Riser?
Yes.
Hathaway?
Yes.
Palmer?
Yes.
Flintoff? Yes. Brazeau?
Yes.
Carrie?
Yes.
Motion adopted 7-0. Okay, J7?
Yep, that brings us to J7.
This was a late arriving, because PM Gap was ahead of schedule. We expected this for our next meeting, but it's ready. It is a formal request for proposal, asking the board to approve issuance of the request for proposal for the annual audit of the Township of Scio as attached with only minor revisions, if any. Both Joyce and I have reviewed this, think it's good to go. They did a comprehensive scope. And I think the sooner we approve it, get it out to bid, the better off we're all gonna be.
I would move them on a motion.
I'll
So moved by Riser, support by Noel to approve issuance of the request for proposals for the annual audit of Township of Scio as attached with only minor revisions, if any. Please call the roll.
Noel,
Yes.
Riser,
Yes.
Hathaway,
Yes.
Palmer,
Yes.
Flintoff, yes, Brazo,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
motion adopted 7-0.
And that brings us to public comment, round 2. This is the time for members of the public to speak for up to 3 minutes on any matter under the purview of the Board of Trustees. Trustee Brazo, I will turn to you as our timekeeper. Kathleen, you want to have a go? A go.
Kathleen Brannigan.
You don't get 99 minutes this time.
I might have, I probably should have mentioned this earlier and I got off track. Would you consider having citizen participation on your strategic planning session?
Yeah, actually, as part of the proposal that's on the agenda, we had talked about potentially having members of the commission participate, some staff members, members of the board, and there's a couple of ways you can do it. You could either have like participation from the public, or you could do the draft and have more like a public hearing or an informational meeting to solicit comments related to any proposal as far as the plan. So it is factored into what was recommended.
I would recommend that citizen participation during the strategic planning. And of course, I'm gonna volunteer for that.
And I would imagine that would be a special meeting, it'd be public.
Yes.
It'd be a public meeting,
Open
so,
to the public.
yeah, that could be built in.
Are there, who's covering our remote participation?
Oh, heavens, that's me.
John, man.
My apologies. I'm looking for hands up. I'm not seeing hands, but I want to make sure I'm doing it right. I see several attendees, but I don't see hands raised. Just, you want to?
Just seems unusual.
We see 15 members of the public. Anybody interested in final public comment? We see no hands. Please raise your Zoom hand if you'd like to speak. There is no interested public.
Motion?
My motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there support?
Support.
All right, moved by Brazo, support by Noel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.